There's a better place to get your podcast. GCNlive.com. Hundreds of thousands of hours archived for your listening pleasure. All free at GCNlive.com.
Rodney Howard-Browne, Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne, Dr. Howard-Browne. I saw you a few weeks ago on the Alex Jones Show. I've known you for many years, and I've followed your work and your ministry, and you're one of the most highly respected people in the Christian profession, and you're also one of the only Christian pastors that's actually talking the truth, speaking the truth, and teaching the folks in your church to understand the truth. We've got a boatload of questions from all over the world, including Las Vegas, Tennessee, and Australia right now waiting for you. And good morning.
Good morning, Doc. How are you?
I'm absolutely blessed beyond measure. I really am. And so we heard you last week with Alex, and I'm just going to kind of let you go this morning. We're going to take a bunch of phone calls. And tell me what you think is happening in the United States right now, Pastor. Let me tell you, just kind of give me your projection for 1915 and you think where we're going, please.
Well, first of all, you know, I come as a missionary from Africa to America. So when, as a kid growing up, I mean, America was to me like the greatest place on the planet the Earth. I mean, I remember when they landed on the moon, and I mean, I sat as a kid riveted listening to that. So here we are. We come to America December of 1987. My wife and I came as missionaries, landed with $300, and I had to work through those first 10 years of feeling in myself there's something wrong here. This is like it's like an illusion. I remember, too, going to both inaugurations of George Bush. I stood like 150 yards from the podium, and I turned to my wife. I said, this is not America. This is a business transaction. Well, I didn't really know what I know now. I just, you know, I have focused my whole time just on the church, going into churches, getting them back to their first love, let them fall in love with Jesus, get people start winning souls, and kind of had left the world alone in the sense of never really, you know, focusing. Because, I mean, a lot of times the church is told to shut up. You're not allowed to address anything to do with the government. And a lot of times it's because of that misnomer of separation of church and state, which there is a separation of church and state, and that's to keep the government from sticking its nose in the church. But the church should be vocal. We should stand for righteousness. And if we see stuff that's wrong, then we should stand up and we should expose it for what it is. If you're going to call yourself a true preacher of the gospel, you know. So anyway, make a long story short, when I began to really, I felt the Lord was leading me to begin to study certain things, and I spent hundreds and hundreds. If you saw my volumes of books that I have here, and then researching history and going through everything, and suddenly finding out that this America, which now I'm an American citizen. And when I was sworn in, I had to raise my hand to pledge to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God, which I realize that many naturally born Americans have never pledged to defend the Constitution. They pledge allegiance to the flag. And I ask many Americans, what does the flag stand for? They say, well, it stands for freedom. Well, what gives us the freedom? It's that document that was penned by the Founding Fathers to give us the rights and the privileges that we have. And I'm watching those rights and privileges eroded. Now, had I not been sworn in as a citizen, then I would just say, look, I can go back to Africa. It doesn't really bother me. You people deal with your own problems. But the moment I became an American citizen and I pledged before God to defend the Constitution, when I see the Constitution being violated before my very eyes as a citizen of this great constitutional republic, I have to do something about it. If I do not do something about it, then I have to renounce my citizenship of America, and I have to take my wife and go back to Africa where I came from.
Okay, Rodney, we're coming to a hard break. We've got to take a network break. When we come back, we'll let you finish your statement. Also, I want you to tell me the one book, the one thing that happened in your life that made you start looking for the truth. We'll be back in just a minute. started again, give me your website where people get a hold of you, get in touch with you, and support your ministry, please.
All right. Our website's revival.com, REVIVAL, and then there's links to my Facebook and Twitter right on the site.
Okay, I want everybody to go to Rodney Howard-Browne's website, Twitter account, Facebook today. Sign up, like him as your friend, do whatever you need to do. But I want everybody to respond. This man's kind enough to take an hour out of his time this morning. It's a very, very busy schedule to try to share with you what he's learned from South Africa, what he's learned by being in the United States, what he learned by pledging his loyalty to the Constitution. You know, Rodney, years ago, I had read a book called The Unseen Hand, probably in the late 80s. And it was a very interesting book. It talked about the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank and all the stuff that was going on. And I was like, okay, that's all right. I understand that now. I didn't understand that before. And I remember I've got an MBA from Florida State University, and I've taught at the college for 2 years. And what was interesting is I never really understood how the Federal Reserve worked until after I read that book. And I read another great book by Shelton Emery called Billions for the Bankers and Debts for the People. That kind of woke me up, but I still kind of stayed asleep until about 2003, 2004. And I was watching some stuff online one night, and something popped up in my little browser thing. It said, what really happened at 9/11? Watch 9/11 Mysteries. And I watched this video called 9/11 Mysteries, which is several hours long. And it started asking all these questions. It really wasn't accusatory. This was asking a bunch of questions about different questions that had not been answered as far as the 9/11 Commission, why Building 7 fell, why all the other buildings fell, about, you know, the Building 7 being the headquarters for the FBI and holding the physical evidence of Enron and all the gold that was missing from the trade towers. And I started thinking, wait a minute, if this is true, which I couldn't see anything that said it wasn't true, then why in the world aren't we being told this? And that's what woke me up. That woke me up about 10 years ago, and I started doing extensive research, started reading prolifically, and I've read, 2 to 3 books sometimes a week when I've got time. And I basically, like you are, I've got this huge library of things that I read. What was the precipitating factor, Rodney, your epiphany moment that basically allowed you to start seeing the truth?
Well, coming from South Africa, first of all, the big questions to me as a boy growing up, who owns our diamonds? Who owns our gold? So as I begin to study that, I begin to find out that we as South Africans did not own our diamonds. De Beers owns the diamonds and Anglo-American owns the gold. Then what I began to do was begin to go back in history and start to look at the different presidents and prime ministers, try to get words of wisdom. I can read a few to you right now if you'd like.
Go right ahead, Rodney. You're on the air, buddy. Go ahead.
All right. This is from Prime Minister of England, Benjamin Disraeli, 1844. The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. Then, of course, the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, A Second Look at the Federal Reserve by G. Edward Griffin, not only gives the history of the central banking system of the globe for the last 300 years, shows what happened in South Africa, and then shows what's happened in America. But Woodrow Wilson, of course, was a university president who was conscripted really to be President of the United States on the condition that he signed 2 acts into power, which would be the Federal Reserve Act and the IRS Act. The Federal Reserve was put together by a group of bankers going down to Jekyll Island, Georgia. I was just there on Saturday. I stopped by. I was coming down from Carolinas, and I walked right into the Federal Reserve room at Jekyll Island, Georgia, where these bankers got together and secretly really put this thing together. Of course, it took 1913 on the 23rd of December 1913 for Woodrow Wilson to sign in those 2 acts, the Federal Reserve Act and the IRS Act. The IRS is also a private institution that polices the American people to pay back the Federal Reserve, which is a private banking cartel that plunders our nation. The reason why you see Wall Street looking so rosy right now is because of $85 billion a month through quantitative easing that's going through Wall Street to prop up this whole scam. But it's going to come down. It cannot carry on. It is inevitable that without divine intervention that there will be a major crash coming in 2015 and 16. And my concern is the American people are not ready for it, and neither are most of the churches. Now, here's Woodrow Wilson in 1916. He says this, 3 years after he signed in the Federal Reserve. I'm the most unhappy man. I've unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by a system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of our nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by a conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. That's Woodrow Wilson, 1916. He also said, some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there's a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they're speaking condemnation of it. Now, I'm just quoting the words of leaders.
You know what's interesting, Pastor? I've read all those same quotes, and you're absolutely right. All of those are so eye-opening for folks that don't know them. But also it points out this evil, this subgroup of people that are so evil that people are scared to speak of them in the higher-ups. And, of course, we all know this is a satanic agenda. But we've got a bunch of folks that want to talk to you, Pastor. Can we go ahead and take a few phone calls real quick?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're going to go to Chris in Las Vegas. You've been holding for a bit. Go ahead. What's your question for Pastor Howard-Browne?
Well, good morning, Pastor, and, of course, you, Ted.
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning.
Well, I'm very curious. There are multiple things throwing about, but specifically since you earlier in the hour spoke about the demonic activity in Africa with WHO, the World Health Organization, the UNICEF or UNICEFartics, or possibly the USAID, the United States Aid for International Development, and the recent
you're talking about the eugenics protocol we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
Okay, because Pastor Rodney wasn't on that when we were talking about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that's fine. I know about it.
Go ahead, Pastor Rodney. What do you know about this? Thank you so much for calling, Chris.
No, listen, it's total eugenics. The wiping out of whole groups of people, where they're going around inoculating people for certain diseases, but they're basically sterilizing them so they cannot have children. It's a total attack on humanity. And most people can't believe that there are people that are that wicked that would do that. But there's a whole plan. They want to reduce the world's population to about 500 million. And if you want to find out about that, you can go to just your Google and you can type in Georgia Guidestones. It was erected in 1979, and there's the manifesto of what they want to do to reduce the world's population to 500 million.
It's interesting you just said that, because right before you came on the air, I just said they want to reduce the population of the planet to 500 million. It's their stated goal, and that's what they want to do. Okay, let's go to Sandra in Tennessee. You got a question for Pastor Brown? Go ahead, Sandra. Pastor Howard-Browne.
Hi, Ted and Rodney. I have a comment. Both of you guys did mention about evil and the government here in the U.S. God is going to judge the government for doing evil, not America as a whole. America is a sheep nation, and God has great plans for America. Now, I got these ideas from Awakening to God DVD series by Gloria Copeland and Billy Graham.
Okay, thank you so much. What do you think? Thank you for calling, Sandra. What do you think about that, Pastor Howard-Browne?
Well, I agree with her. I'm fighting for America right now. That's why we're going from city to city and mobilizing the people to win souls, because if we turn the hearts of the American people back to God, God will have mercy on America one more time, as what happened in the First Great Awakening in the 1700s and the Second Great Awakening in the 1800s. And we believe in God for another great spiritual awakening that will shake America to the core and set back the tide of wickedness that's coming against this land. And I believe God can do that. I'm totally positive when it comes to that. But by me being positive on one side, I've got to look at the facts on the other side and mobilize the people. This is where the evil is. We have to do something about it. And a lot of people I talk to, they say, well, it's so big. What can we do about it? I spoke to one pastor. He said, look, I've known this for 50 years. I said, and you've done nothing? I said, listen, one woman took prayer out of schools. If every person listening to me right now would pray and ask God to help them, they could do something to dismantle the trash that's going on right now at a local level, at a county level, at a state level, and then at a national level. I believe it's imperative that everyone gets involved.
Now, what do you think we should do as Christians? Should we store food? Should we buy guns? Should we store water? Should we get solar panels? I mean, what do you think we should do? How do we combine this with our faith? I mean, well, I've always talked about how Isaiah was fed basically by the widow woman, and how basically he didn't have any provisions. How do we reconcile that with our faith and what we should do as far as preparation, Pastor Howard-Browne?
Look, I think everybody needs to do what they feel to do. I live on 25 acres. I grow my own vegetables. I've got cows. I've got my dairy here. And that's just my hobby. That's what I love to do. But everybody needs to do what they need to do. The bottom line is we've got a problem with our inner cities because you've got over 50 million people dependent upon the government. And the moment the crash comes, there's the cutoff of the food stamps and whatever. So I'm actually moving ahead with not just – I'm not actually particularly worried about me. I'm concerned about the millions of people that live in the inner cities, that the moment the dependency upon the government is cut off, and I was in Congress this last July. We went to D.C. We were 3 weeks in the Capitol. We had a crusade there. Over 31,000 people were saved. We went into the Congress and the Senate. I met with many people. One of the congressmen, and I shared with him what's coming, and he looked at me and said, "How do you know this?" I said, "Sir, I've studied." He said, "You and probably 10 other congressmen know what's happening in the financial system of America and the globe." He said, "Sir, when it hits," he said, "we're going to be in a crisis. Within 12 hours, there'll be no food in the stores." And he said, "We'll have to go to martial law because of what the rioting that will take place in the inner city." So I'm very concerned about this as a whole. I'm not so worried about myself. The Lord will take care of me as He always has.
Pastor Rodney, how do you get other pastors to listen to this? Because so many of them are so concerned they preach the truth to their conversations, that to their congregations, that they'll stop giving money for their budgets and for their programs, et cetera, what they're doing. When we come back from this break, I want you to answer that for me, please. Here's an article that just came out. Talked about the last week being the worst for the financial markets in 3 years, with the drop of the drop of oil prices has fallen 50%. So the last time this has happened was before the crash of 2008. It says the Dow's worst week in 3 years, financials worst week in 2 months, materials worst week since 2011, gold's best week in 6 months, silver's last 2 weeks are the best in 6 months. Goes on to go the U.S. oil rig count worse in 2 years. The U.S. dollar's worst week since July of 2013. Portugal bonds worst week since July 2011. And Greek stocks worst since 1987. So we've had some huge drops in the market in just this past week. Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne is on the show with me today. And I'm going to ask him very quickly, how in the world can he get pastors to basically do what he's asking them to do and tell the truth about what's going on when so many pastors feel it's going to directly affect contributions coming into their churches if people start preparing for what may or may not come, which we personally believe and I believe is going to happen unless God steps in with divine inspiration and divine intervention. How do you answer that, Pastor Brown?
Well, we haven't seen a drop in anything, and our church is prepared. I've done conferences talking about preparation for the days ahead. We've got everybody growing their own food. But on food supply storage, let me just tell you, there was a law passed back in the 30s that you're not allowed to hoard food. So the fact of the matter is that under martial law situation, they can go house to house and collect any food that you got stored. I mean, we're going to have divine intervention in this because this is all driven by United Nations Agenda 21. The next step on the horizon is to disarm the American people, which in Florida where we live, that's going to be a very hard thing to do. So that is either going to result in one or two things, which will probably end up in another civil war. God forbid that we should ever end up in that situation. But this has all been driven by these offshore banking cartels. Let me just tell the listener another book you want to get in conjunction with the creature is called The Tower of Basel, B-A-S-E-L, written by Adam Labor. It's called The Shadowy History of a Secret Bank That Runs the World. It's the International Bank of Settlements out of Basel, Switzerland. It's the reason why Switzerland was neutral in the war and why no one touched Switzerland because it housed the money of the whole of Europe. And the Federal Reserve bailed out every central bank of the world back in 1934. And that's why the dollar is the currency of the world. I've got all the pictures, I've got the documents and everything. When you see the scam, then you realize
what's the name of that book again?
It's called The Tower of Basel. Came out last year, B-A-S-E-L. Adam Labor is the author.
I'm going to order that myself.
You know, that book
The International Bank of Settlements was actually a bank that was established right after the First World War for Germany to pay reparations. But it is now the Bank of Central Banks, and every month for the last 80 years, once a month, all the governors of the central banks fly into Basel, Switzerland, to go to the International Bank of Settlements. It's like the Vatican. They have diplomatic immunity. They have their own police. They have their own medical fire department. They are not subject to Swiss law. And this works in conjunction with our Federal Reserve. If you want to go online on YouTube, you can pull up Ben Bernanke talking about he doesn't know where $9 trillion worth of off-balance sheet transactions have gone. So ultimately, when we look at all this stuff, we have to come back to the money, because the love of money is the root of all evil. How is it possible that here we have 300+ million people in America, and we use 70% of the world's drugs? How is that possible? Is it
you're absolutely right. But again,
because
a lot of folks,
the water supply is poisoned, the food supply is poisoned through the GMOs, and people are oblivious to it. They can't even see what's going on. They think I'm crazy.
Pastor Rodney, they think we're all crazy. The problem is when you tell the truth, the Bible says in Ecclesiastes, where there is much wisdom, there is great sorrow. And that is so true. When we try to tell the truth to people, either they're going to listen or they're not. Let he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Let him who has eyes to see, let him see. And basically, that's the problem nowadays. That's why I was asking you, and I don't know how you do it, because you speak at so many churches around the country. How have you been able to awaken so many pastors up to the truth? That's the big question on somebody's mind right now.
Well, I talk to the pastor. If he's open, I'll deal with it. If he's not, I can't. I can't go there. I fear for the congregation. I fear for the days ahead for them, because they're not going to be ready. But I've got a whole series I did called Exposing the World System, and we make that available on our website. So I try to...
What is your website again, please?
Revival.com. www.revival.com.
I want everybody to go to Pastor Rodney's website, revival.com. I want you to get a copy of this CD set that he's done, the books that he's written on this, the information he has on this. I want you to support this man's ministry. He's trying to do a work that's very difficult to do. He's trying to go out and help a lot of people who simply don't want to wake up. We're all walking around kind of in a zombie state in the United States because of the fluoride in the water and the GMO foods and the poisons and the drugs that we've been taking. I talked about this earlier. So I want everybody to go to revival.com and support Pastor Rodney's efforts today. And when we come back, we're going right straight to phone calls. We're going... Pastor Rodney just said something very, very good. He said that he talks to pastors. If he can talk to them and they're open-minded, basically he continues to talk to them and tries to educate them. But when they're not open-minded and they don't want to listen, he basically has to step away because there's nothing you can do for someone who doesn't want to listen. Okay, Dave in Arkansas, you've been holding it for a bit. What kind of questions do you have? Go ahead, Dave in Arkansas, for Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne and Ted Brower.
Hello, Eric.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Pastor Rodney, when you mentioned, us praying and, getting deliverance, if you will, Daniel chapter 7:4, where it describes the first beast being like a lion and having eagle's wings, which were plucked off. The eagle's wings always made me think of, the USA, and the young lions were like the colonies or whatever of, Great Britain. And I'm just wondering, if it has to come to that where we, we are judged and prayer might not be, you can't rewrite the Bible. And I could be way off on this.
Okay. Dave, thank you so much for calling. Pastor Rodney, what do you have to say about that?
Here's what a lot of people ask me. They say, well, we're living in the last days. Everything's heading to one world government, one money system, the rise of the Antichrist, one world religion. You can see that moving even now across the world. However, here's what I say. If you go back through the history and down through the years and centuries, there were times when everything was coming together then too. But people stood up and said, no, not on my watch. Not on my watch. This is not going to happen. It can happen when I'm gone, but not while I'm gone.
That's right. You preach it, Pastor.
And that's what I believe. Right. I believe we need to draw a line in the sand and say absolutely not. This is not going to happen.
I believe you're absolutely right. Let's go to Miat in New York. Go ahead, Miat.
am I on air now?
You're on air, sweetie. Go right ahead. You're on with Ted and Pastor Rodney.
Yes. I want to say that yes, and when I get off the air, make sure that he says the author, Adam's last name of the Tower of Babel. But I want to say thank you, Ted, for mentioning, I think it was a Wall Street Journal article around the 3,000 killings, and I'm not sure that includes the maimings and beatings. Of course, there was Abner. I'd like the pastor to reflect on my comments. There was Abner Louima, who was raped by a broomstick and a broken plunger in the precinct bathroom. And, of course, after that, the policy became shoot to kill, because he got a very, very large settlement versus what the payout is if the black person winds up dead. And Ramarley Graham is another one who the police chased, broke down his door, and shot him in his bathroom on supposedly a bag of marijuana, or he might have a gun. So these are cases we don't know about. But what the torture piece is what I really want to talk about. What we need to do is we need to look at the prison system in this country. 5% of the population, 25% of the world's prisoners, and it's been designed, and why it's so hard to get someone who has the status of being right in there, there's two justice systems, is because it was designed to target black people under the war on drugs with Nixon and Reagan's.
Mia, thank you so much for calling. I think she's absolutely right. We talked about this earlier on the show, Rodney. You missed out on the first hour.
There's not even a question about it. First of all, police brutality is unacceptable, number one.
That's right.
Number two, there is no war on drugs. So when you got Bank of America and Wells Fargo laundering drug money from the cartels, there's no war on drugs. This whole thing is as crazy as any story I've ever heard. And the fact of the matter is that the privatization of our prison system, we have more people incarcerated than Communist China or Soviet Union. So, I mean, what's the story here? So there's big money to be made in the prisons.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. We call it a prison industrial complex. I mean, a lot of the counties and the states have to actually sign contracts with prison systems to bring them into the state to provide them X amount of prisoners per year. And, forgive me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyhow. I mean, the war on marijuana, which is complete nonsense. I mean, the reality is this is basically a hemp product that people smoke. I don't agree with smoking it. I've never smoked it. I've never had any interest in smoking it. But the point is, we have probably over 1 million people incarcerated for using marijuana in the judicial system and the prison system. And the sad part about it is these people end up with felonies on their records. They can never get decent jobs. They can never get out of jail because they don't have the proper representation in some cases to do so. And basically, if they want to smoke pot, I don't agree with it. But to me, it's no worse than alcohol, as long as they're not driving and drinking and they're smoking impaired. So I don't know. I just think the whole thing is complete nonsense. I don't think we need a constitutional referendum in the state of Florida to get it passed. But I think the legislature needs to do something to stop this insane stuff. You get caught with a little bit of marijuana, you end up getting charged with a felony. You end up going to prison. And it's sad because, again, it feeds the prison industrial complex. How do you feel on this issue?
No, it's the way you make money. If nobody was arrested, you wouldn't fill the prisons.
That's right.
I mean, we have such a corruption even of our judicial system. One preacher said to me, you think everything's corrupt? I said, yes. I said, without God involved, it's all corrupt.
That's right. I agree with that.
The moment money's involved, then people's hearts are being bought by the dollar. And that's why even preachers don't want to say anything because they're afraid of losing the income.
There you go. That's what I was talking about earlier. That's exactly right. I've seen that repeatedly.
But I'm not going to be quiet. I know what the truth is. I'm going to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And our church knows, and we're reaching into the inner city. This last Sunday, we had a huge altar call. People are coming on buses from the inner city, and we've got to see a turnaround in this thing. One of the things that I see being stirred up right now with racial strife, and also to try to create a situation whereby the police are not able to govern and do their job, so that they can bring in the military. That's the next step of what they want to do, create a situation of lawlessness in America to whereby our police cannot do their job and there we have to have NATO forces patrolling the streets and keeping law and order. That's where.
So you believe also that the NATO forces will be used to patrol the streets of the United States, which means we'll have foreign troops on ground here.
They're already on ground here. I've got pastors calling me from different parts of America, and they're already foreign troops on the soil.
Okay, let's go to Pastor William. Okay, David, Arkansas, go ahead.
Yes. You all know that was created by the West, and it's really a bunch of mercenaries disguised as Muslim extremists, and each of them get about $200,000 a year, and I think they're based in Arizona out west. I just want to tell everybody to look it up themselves on Google.
Now, go ahead, say that. You're saying that the Muslim extremists are based out of Arizona?
Well, ISIS is just a bunch of mercenaries paid for by Western nations, and they're they use a cover story as Muslim extremists, and each of them get about $200,000 a year, and they one of their bases is in Arizona. They get trained. They're mercenaries.
Okay, Dave, thank you so much for calling. Pastor Brown, what do you think about that?
Well, I know we've funded Al Qaeda for years. Of course, we fund our ISIS, so that's all being done out of the United States, just like communism was funded, socialism, everything. Even here's the way the bankers operate. Okay, you got to understand. If there's peace, they can't make money. If there's war, that's how they make money. Because Nathan Rothschild funded both sides of the war. They funded Napoleon and they funded England, and then they told England they lost when in actual fact they won. And then Nathan Rothschild bought up England for pennies on the dollar. And that's the way that this whole thing operates.
So it always goes back to the money, doesn't it?
Yeah, if there's peace, then you send in people that are going to create the problem, and while they're fighting each other, you dispossess them of their wealth. Thomas Jefferson said in 1802, if the American people will ever allow the private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the companies that will spring up around them will deprive the American people of their property so they wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. That was 1802. He warned America.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that's exactly what's happened, and that's exactly what happened in the Weimar Republic in 1920, 21, 22, when they started having their quote-unquote, their basically their printing of money that was being given to the banks, and the banks were buying up all the industry in Germany, which of course planted the seeds for World War II. And I remember another quote was, they were talking to the matriarch of the Rothschild clan, and she said, there is never a war anywhere unless my son wills it. And that's true too. I mean, this thing is running the corporations of in the countries, and the sad part about it is the American population is slowly, it's so slow, waking up, and they need to realize they need to turn, pray, get on their knees, and God will turn and heal our land. But we have to understand this entire corrupt banking cartel, that they've got to go. Let's go to Pastor William Raymond in New Jersey. Go ahead, Pastor Raymond.
Hello. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
I'm totally on board and in agreement with everything I've heard here this morning. And I've been a guest on the Power Hour myself on 3 occasions. And I'd like to hear the pastor's comments on something that's absolutely critical here. I'm the pastor of the first church in the history of America to be seized under court order for refusing to incorporate Christ under the beast state. That happened on March 24th, 2005, and you can learn more about that by going to our website, the churchatsalem.info. And I want to propose to you that the root of the cause for everything bad that's going on right now is the fact that the churches have literally sold their spiritual birthright, or you might say their eternal God-given immunity in Christ, in exchange for a temporary state-granted exemption. And in the process, that impresses on the church that does that a legal personality, and at that point, they've pretty much thrown the First Amendment out the window, or any other claims to Christ's immunity that they have. and they become a creature of the state and subject to the state as their new master.
Well, Pastor Raymond, I agree with you 100%. I'm not sure how to deal with this. Thank you so much for calling. Pastor Rodney, what do you think about this?
Well, first of all, let me say this. There's no one that can take away your First Amendment. I mean, that's only your fear that's going to respond that way. We have an organization, but that doesn't stop me from saying and doing what God's called me to do. And, if whoever didn't like it, I'll just pay taxes on all the donations. It's not a problem to me. No one's going to put a gag order on me, and I'm not afraid. I have nothing to hide. There's nothing to fear. And we've just got to be bold in the time that we're living in. It's got nothing to do about a structure or whatever. I mean, the fact of the matter is that here's what Americans don't know, okay? Let me give a rude awakening here. Every American born in this country with a birth certificate, you are part of the corporation. The Fed prints money against your name, so you're already part of the system. It's got nothing to do with the corporation you found or whatever. You're already part of the corporation. The Fed prints billions of dollars on every American citizen, and that's a fact. I've got all the documents and everything, so people need to wake up. The fact is that we end up... Sorry?
Let's go ahead. Let's go to Annette in West Virginia. Pastor Rodney, we're running out of time. We got so many people who want to talk to you. I know I only got you till the top of the hour. Go ahead, Annette, West Virginia.
Good morning. Every nation is formed by a group of people that have a belief system, and they structure their government based on that belief system. Now, many Americans don't realize that we just cannot have anybody and everybody come in this country with different belief systems which affect the changes that have happened in our government. Now, go to Psalm 82:6. Where God said, you only have I known of all the people of the earth. Therefore,
we're going to a hard break. We'll come right back to your phone call when we get back from the break. But basically, what we all need to realize is that we all do that. We all have a belief system that we have to continue to believe, that we have to know what's there with God and what's going on with God. So, Annette, give me a real quick question so we can ponder that real quickly, please.
That America is in the Bible. Look at Isaiah chapter 18. It's described. The prophet Joel is describing the condition in our country at this time. I would like to give him two websites, kingidentity.com and Text Mars. You must know about Text Mars. And he's discussing the political ramifications of what's of our belief system.
Now, Annette, what verse in Joel are you talking about?
Well, it's in the 3 chapters. It just describes it. Starts off and it goes into more so in the 2nd and 3rd chapter. It's only 3 chapters, the prophet Joel.
Okay, hang on one second. Thank you so much for calling in. What do you think about the prophet Joel in our context of what we're talking about this morning, Pastor Rodney?
No, listen, I love America, and so as far as I'm concerned, God's hands on this country. Knowing what I know, the fact that we even have an America is a miracle.
That's right.
How far gone this thing is from 1913. So this is not just a problem with the current administration. When the American people wake up and realize that the Democrats and the Republicans are working for the same people.
That's right.
So that's all just to divide everybody and get them to think they voted for their guy, but in actual fact, they did absolutely nothing. We have to change this thing from a grassroots movement, village by village, town by town, county by county, waking the people up, getting them back to the Constitution. And I tell you, we've got to bring America back to God. This is a Christian nation. This one nation was founded on godly principles. And the first mega church was in the Capitol building. George Washington started it, and it ran for 100 years, and the Marine Band did the praise and worship. So...
Well, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, when we lost sound money in 1913, of course, they tried for years with the attempted assassination of Andrew Jackson because with Biddle trying to get the Bank of America back in the United States, and when Lincoln started printing sound money with the greenbacks, basically and bypassed the Rothschild banking cartel, he was assassinated. And then we know, of course, they ended up getting Roosevelt in and caused him basically to do what he did. And then what happened? He ran a third-party ticket with Woodrow Wilson and Taft, and basically got Wilson in, and basically ended up, you're exactly right, he had two things he had to do, and that was to pass the Federal Reserve Act and the IRS Act. And it's sad because that's what's happened to the United States for the last 100 years. It's the money people that have taken over the country. In fact, the Bible says that's why Jesus was so clear. The love of money is the root of all evil. It's okay to have money. It's okay to have stuff, but you can't be loving it because all that does is promotes greed. And what is your web? We're going to break again, Pastor Rodney. What is your website again?
Revival.com. Isn't it amazing that Jesus whipped the bankers of the day? Went in, made a whip, and beat them. How's that?
No, absolutely right. He whipped the bankers of the day, and he got incredibly angry at them. We come back from the break with the last segment with Pastor Rodney. We'll try to get the rest of these phone calls. Stay tuned. Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne for being on with me this morning. We've got one short segment left, and then he has to go. He's been so kind to be so gracious to give us so much of his time this morning. I really appreciate it. And again, go to revival.com to contact him. To get on my health newsletter, you can go to healthmasters.com. And we'll continue to give you cutting-edge information. I want you also to support thepowermall.com with Joyce. Let us always remember this is Joyce's show, and I'm just filling in. Joyce has done a great job, and we need to support her right now. We need to be at thepowermall.com. We need to be buying information from her, the stuff, the books that she has, and we also need to be buying products from her. She's a wonderful person, and she all needs our prayers right now. Okay, we've got one guy who's been on hold now for over 20 minutes. Wants to talk about supernatural intervention with Steve in Virginia. Let's go to him. Let's take a quick call, and then let's see have to give the rest of the top of the hour to Pastor Brown. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say yes. I believe in the intervention. We heard some time ago that the time would come when people would perhaps confiscate food. They know what we have, where it is already, or they have that ability to find that out. And I believe that that's true, that we will have to rely more on the Lord. I don't know where we are as a country as far as biblical history. It seems that we're closer to the Lord's coming than we may have thought, but I do believe that the Lord will protect his own people in the days ahead, and certainly that includes many true Americans. As far as the country coming back on the larger scale that we would want to see, I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if there's time left for that on that scale, but I believe the Lord will be protecting his own people. One terrible thing we heard of was this, you may have heard of this, the people trying to develop some kind of an ultrasound technique, which is not good, which desensitizes the brain. You know, there are various ways that they've come against us or are trying to. And,
Steve, I got to give Pastor Rodney a little bit of time. Thank you so much for your call. What do you think about Steve's comment? What do you think about the fact that God's going to supernaturally protect his people? And also, Pastor Rodney, this is something that's always coming up in different shows that I'm on. Do you believe it? Are you a mid or post-tribulation person as far as the rapture?
Let me say this. I'm ready to go in the end time. I just don't think the church is ready. I think that maybe when it's all said and done, people are going to have a wake-up call. So whatever that means, whether that's mid or post, who cares? I'm committed no matter what. I'm not looking to suddenly leave the planet so that I'm going to occupy till he comes. And that's all I know. So I grew up being free, but I really don't care. What I mean by that, I don't think the church is ready for him to come right now.
I agree with you. And what I always tell folks is that what happened in Libya with the 10,000 people now have died of Ebola. A lot of them were taught pre-tribulation rapture, and basically they haven't been raptured. And so it's interesting. I think you're absolutely right. I don't think the church is ready for Christ to come back and to get raptured out. And I fall in the same category with you. I really don't care. I hope it's a pre-trib rapture. Don't really care what it is, because whatever it is, what God's going to decide that it is, and it's not up to me to make that choice.
Yeah, and supernatural protection, supernatural provision, supernatural, just like in the book of Acts. And we're gonna find out who actually really believes God in the days that's coming. So, and I do believe, as the gentleman said, that Jesus is coming very, very soon. However, I do believe that God can shake America one more time. If you go back and look at the first Great Awakening and the second Great Awakening, you'll see they turned the tide in America. If we have one third spiritual Great Awakening, it will shake America to the core and set the enemy back 40 years. And that's what I'm believing for. So that's why we're going from city to city. We're holding meetings. We're mobilizing everybody. We're going on the streets. Just since the 2nd of January 2011, over 5.6 million people have given their lives to Christ. So I'm on a quest to bring in the harvest of souls and wake everybody up. This is not a game. America needs to wake up, stop spending their time with NFL, NBA, all these sports.
Pastor Rodney, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you for the bottom of my heart for coming on with me today. The audience has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for the great questions. And Pastor Rodney, next time I'm on, we'll have you back on again. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning.